And as has previously been forecast, we have Georgina Murphy with us right now. Georgina is the campaign manager for the Department of Education and Training. She has a public-facing role, including statewide advertising campaigns, and has been leading the, part of the nation-leading 3-year-old kinder campaign. And it's an initiative that's offered nearly $5 billion of investment for funded kindergarten for all 3-year-olds across the state. Prior to working with DET, Georgina has covered and delivered communications for major events, racing, property development, big brands, traveling to all corners of the world, even the smallest countries. She once wrote a weekly column for the infamous NT News. So for those of you who are aware of Crocodile Headlines, the home of Crocodile Headlines, Georgina was up there writing those columns. Thank you so much, Georgina. It's been a delight working with you in the lead up to this session, and I'm really looking forward to hearing it. Go well.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Susan, that intro made me sound much more exciting than I am, so I hope I live up to the entree. I'm delighted to be here with you today, and I'm really excited to be part of one of these labs. I think it's a really cool concept, and I've already been telling anyone at the Department of Education and Training who will listen that I'm keen to see how we can perhaps look at this concept in our world as well. As Susan said, I am the campaign manager for 3-year-old kindergarten at the department. And for those of you who are not familiar, 3-year-old kinder is a $5 billion or near $5 billion investment over the decade by the state to see that every 3-year-old child has access to 15 hours a week of a government-funded 3-year-old kinder program. Some of you will probably be familiar with the concept if you have children or grandchildren. Most children in Victoria currently attend a 4-year-old kinder program in the year before school. So it means that children will actually go to 2 years of kinder before school. And research across the world has shown that that brings significant education, social and developmental benefits for all kids. And at the moment, I will acknowledge that 3-year-old kinder is not a new concept, but in the current climate, parents and carers pay for children to have that 2 years. So that's changing it up. And Victoria is indeed leading the nation in that we are the first state or territory to offer this initiative. So it's a huge investment, it's a huge commitment, and it brings with it some pretty significant communications. We'll go with opportunities, but also challenges as well. Now, Kate is going to be the star of my technology today, so I might just get her to bring up my presentation, if that's okay, please. Thank you. Now, one thing I would like to acknowledge from the outset is that, as I've said, this is a $5 billion investment, or almost $5 billion over 10 years. So that brings with it some pretty significant communications resources and pretty significant communications need as well. That said, the framework and the planning that we have used to underpin this campaign that I will take you through is the exact same framework that I've used on campaigns with, as my dad would say, that ran on the smell of an oily rag. So I would like you to keep that in mind as I talk to some of the things that we've done, because the framework doesn't change. And it's also worth mentioning, and Susan and I touched on this a couple of weeks ago, in that, in my experience, sometimes the communications activity that has the least resources actually is the most effective in meeting its objectives, because it's better planned out, much more resource conscious, efficient, and really takes advantage of every opportunity along the way. So, as I said, I very much acknowledge that this is a large-scale public-facing campaign, but the planning that's gone into it is underpinned and very similar to what you would do for something at a shorter term or a smaller scale as well. Now, Kate, if I could just get you to hit play on my video, please. I'm going to show you our 30-second television commercial that's currently in market. So you may have seen it on your screens.
To dream big, our kids need the best start in life. So the Victorian Government is investing almost $5 billion to deliver 3-year-old kinder across the state from 2022. That means an extra year of learning, playing and making friends for Victorian children. Go to vic.gov.au/kinder. 3-year-old kinder. Best start, best life. Authorised by the Victorian Government, Melbourne.
Thank you. Okay, so to kick us off, excuse me, I'm just going to move my head from my slides there. There we go. So the 5-step framework of a communications plan. And as I said, this doesn't matter whether you're investing millions of dollars or you've got negative $5 to spend from a communications perspective. The first of all is the what. What are we trying to do and what do we need to say? Who do we need to talk to? When should we communicate? How should we say it? Where is our audience? And how are we going to measure, pivot, the word of 2020, and evaluate our work? Now, acknowledging you've had 3 labs ahead of today, my session this morning will primarily concentrate on steps 3, 4, and 5. But if we just move on to the next slide, I'm going to quickly take you through the what and the who from our campaign's perspective. So far left column, we talk about what we're trying to do. So what are the broader objectives that communications will assist with? And they're things like building awareness of universal funded 3-year-old kinder. Now, I appreciate that sounds incredibly bureaucratic, and I'm willing to admit it does, but universal funded simply means it'll be statewide and it'll be funded by the Victorian Government. So we've got a number of points there that we're at a high level that our objectives are. The what we need to say, which sits in the middle, is a quick overview of some of our key messages. Because of the big story we need to tell in relation to 3-year-old kinder, we've got a 2-phased approach in communications. And I'm going to take you through that in future slides. But in short, the first 2 are building awareness. So we're telling parents and carers and our target audiences that 3-year-old kinder is coming. And we talk about the benefits and what it means for their children and the broader community by attending. Messages 3 and 4 are much more action focused, and they're asking our target audiences to speak to their local services, enrol and visit our website. Sounds incredibly simple, but it took us some time to agree to those messages, as I'm sure you can appreciate. And then the who on the far right there is a quick overview of our audiences. Target audiences, again, it sounds incredibly obvious. Parents and carers of children predominantly 0 to 2 years old, so we're reaching them before kindergarten age. And then I've specifically called out 2 of our minority audiences, multicultural Victorians and Koori families. And it's really, really important that in our communications planning, we think about those audiences. And if there's a different story or a different respectful way we need to communicate with or in addition to ensure that it's clear and fair and respectful, and that they too feel part of what we're trying to create. Because sometimes the message is different. There might be different entitlements or different programs, or they might know of kindergarten in a different concept. So we need to think about that as well. I've also listed some influences there. Sorry. The influencers I listed, I will speak to later in relation to resources and really squeezing that lemon of all campaigns. Some people refer to influencers as a secondary audience, and we sometimes do at the department too. Again, they sound really obvious, but they're really important advocates when we're selling such a big initiative. Okay, thanks, Kate. So on to step 3 is in relation to timing. When should we communicate? So this is on our 5-step program. This is number 3 of our framework. We need to think about, is there an end goal we need to work to? Are there milestone dates or timelines we need to consider? And we need to think about how influential they are. Is there something we can capitalize on to really push our communications or promote a little bit further or take an opportunity? And should we consider phasing our approach? Now, in a nutshell, The 3-year-old Kinder Parent and Carer Facing campaign, which I'm talking to you about today, is very much geared up to enrolment. So enrolment's opening and enrolment's closing. Of course, those dates and timings change across the state. So we need to be really conscious in our planning as to that targeting from a local level as to when those enrolments open and close. And be having those conversations, for want of a better phrase, with Victorian families and their influencers ahead of that stage. So that is our key kind of end goal, for want of a better phrase. But there's other dates we can think of as we step back and we think about other launches or announcements or activities that we can capitalise on to continue that conversation and continue to build that awareness. So the timing is really important. Again, sounds really obvious. I think it's also worth thinking about in the planning if there's a special milestone or special annual day that you can build on as well. So in your line of work, I was thinking about things like Global Recycling Day or World Earth Day or Earth Hour that you might like to consider trying to essentially capitalize on. How can you build that into your plan? How can you launch your new campaign on those days or as part of that? Or can you do some form of localized media opportunity as part of that day's celebrations to build that awareness within the community? It's also about thinking whether we need to plan our activity around those announcements or milestones, or whether we can shift those milestones to suit our activity and our agenda of communications. I've put up here a really simple table that we use at the department for our communications planning. It covers a milestone, details, date, and then timing. And in relation to timing, we need to think about whether it's critical, important, relevant, or flexible. So again, sounds really simple, but it's a really incredibly helpful tool as you step out any kind of either conflicting or complementary activity that you can build on. And if you do it at the planning stage, everyone knows from the get-go what it all looks like. Okay, thank you, Kate. Now, if we think about step number 4, it's a how should we say it, which doesn't sound particularly grammatically correct. But essentially what I mean by this is, where is our audience and where do they get information? Now, I've listed here some things that probably sound quite instinctive or almost obvious, but these 5 points, and I won't read them out, really help us shape our tools and our tactics, and therefore our timings and our communications activity. So we think about other families as influencers. We think about providing resources to third parties, be it councils or community groups, to use on their own facilities or their own communications channels. And we also think about the tools we can provide health professionals such as maternal and child health nurses, which I had on the influencer list in previous slides, to really promote and advocate our messages as well. Now, I've put a map of Victoria there, as I'm sure you're all aware, and the map is divided into local government areas, and there's 3 colours. What I didn't mention at the start was, when I was introducing 3-year-old Kinder, was the fact that it's being rolled out in stages, which is both a communications challenge, but also a really great opportunity. So the pink colour of the map is the first 6 local government areas that rolled out 15 hours of funded, families in 6 local government areas were eligible for 15 hours of funded kindergarten from last year, so in 2020. So that's places like South Gippsland, Hindmarsh and Bullockshire. The purple colour are a further 15 local government areas that were offered the program from this year. So we've now got a total of 21, 6 plus 15. And then from 2022, so next year, the program will go statewide. The reason I've specifically called this bit of information out here is because it really talks to the need for targeting, for honing in resources, for having messages that resonate with audiences, and for localized messages and content. This was really important because The last thing we wanted to do was be telling a family in Melton or Ballarat or downtown Mildura about funded 3-year-old kinder in 2019 when they're not going to be eligible until 2021 or 2022. So our communications in those initial 6 local government areas were really, really targeted. We also needed to think about how our audiences differed as we moved through those rollout stages. So in 2019, we started talking to those 6 local government areas. And then in 2020, we started talking to the 15, and it goes on. And now we're at the point that we can advertise on TV because we're talking to a statewide audience. One of the things that, again, might sound a little bit instinctive, one of the things we needed to be conscious of was things like internet access. And some communities fed back through their local department representatives that social media advertising was fantastic, but a lot of families didn't have access to really strong internet connection. So they still read the local paper, which was lucky because we're advertising there as well. Thank you, Kate. I've put up here a couple of examples of localised content. On the left-hand side is a print advertisement that was produced to promote 3-year-old kinder in last year ahead of this year. So East Gippsland was one of the 15 local government areas that offered 3-year-old kinder this year. So as I'm sure you're all aware, the people who read newspapers aren't only locals from that area. So we specifically wanted to make sure that even though we were advertising in local newspapers, that it was very clear that we were managing expectations that this offering was for families in this local government area. And the example I've put up there and I've highlighted with the red circle was East Gippsland. And this was something we did for the 2020 and 2021 rollout areas. So the 6 local government areas and then the 15. We did something very similar online as well with social advertising. And to the right there, you can see the example we used for West Wimmera. And with social media, we were then able to target to see that that fell in with geo-targeting that fell to the West Wimmera cohort in the state. And also fantastic to see that West Wimmera Shire Council shared that one as well, which was great. And it's really, that talks to my next point in relation to using those influencer audiences. If you'd like to move, yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Kate. So up here, I've put some real-time examples of different things we did that, with the exception of the translation on the far right, didn't cost money. They did take time, they did use human resources, but they didn't cost money. They weren't advertisements. So as I mentioned earlier, we know that we needed to target families, and we know that our advertising drives broad awareness about the program amongst Victorian families. But the families have told us in our research, both informally and formally, that they then go to the kindergarten and have conversations with the educators and teachers. So with that in mind, we wanted to make sure that our educators and teachers on the ground across the state had the information they needed to answer families' questions. So we put together the fast facts, which you can see on the top left. Now the fast facts are essentially key messages that we've just reappropriated to really turn them into speaking points. We presented these as what we were calling a communications resource pack, and the cover sheet for that is on the left-hand side there, the little yellow square bottom left. And that included things like the fast facts talking points, some imagery and social media tiles, some translated content like the Vietnamese to the right-hand side, some Facebook posts and special content where you could localize to your area or to your service name, and some website template text. The example to the right is an infographic we had developed and shared with industry peak bodies, so our workforce unions and sector representatives, including the Early Learning Association of Australia. And that's just a little screenshot of something that they'd shared of our content on their Facebook page. Again, it not only helps us further promote our messages, it helps our third parties to best explain the reform, because this is really big news for the early childhood sector as well as being an exciting thing for Victorian families. So it's a really big story to tell, and there's a lot of jigsaw pieces as we move around. That said, if we just move on to the next slide, thank you. Last but not least is measurement and evaluation. Ironically, it is my end slide, but I have said it's not just at the end. And when we think about measurement and evaluation, we tend to, at the department, we split it into 3 sections: a pre, a during, and a post. So, and all of these need to be considered in the planning. And I know that you'll be stepping through this in future sessions as well. So, for example, drawing on previous learnings. Thinking about things like, what have I learnt from previous communications we've done that I can apply to this activity? Can we set a baseline to measure post activity? And that sounds all a bit fancy, but when I say baseline, it can be as anecdotal or as simple as thinking about current website hits and if you're expecting them to increase, or Facebook engagement, or sentiment of media coverage that you might have in your local newspapers, or commentary or engagement on newsletter articles or EDMs that you might send out, so email groups. So just have a think about how that can shape or set up measurement for the campaign that you're planning. In campaign monitoring, I typically mean real time. So do we need to consider providing updates and reporting, and how are we going to do that? What tools will we draw on? Will it be website edit, website visits? Will it be engagement? Will it be queries on our customer service 1-800 number? Will it be pamphlets dropped off or filled out, or complaints, or whatever it may be? And then, is there opportunities to pivot and update our activity based on what we're learning in real time? Now, as I'm sure you're familiar, especially with social media, people will tell you pretty quick smart if they don't like something. And that can be used in a really good way. For example, if you're using different photographs for your communications, is there a photo that even anecdotally seems to be resonating better? Can you use more of that? Or is there a message that's resonating or really not hitting the mark that you can mix up? So it's important to, where possible, think about a plan that is fluid and flexible within reason, that you can then take learnings as they happen and shape future activity. And again, this doesn't have to be in a long-term communications plan. It can apply for something that's only a month or 2 long as well. And then the post, so we've got pre, during, and post. Post measurement in relation to ahead of starting, we need to think about what success looks like. What are we trying to achieve? And how are we going to measure and evaluate? So again, thinking about those tools, thinking about what resources we have just at our fingertips to draw on. And it doesn't have to be formalized. It doesn't have to include expensive evaluation plans. This day and age, there is so many different options that we can draw on to both set that baseline data and use from both a qualitative and a quantitative perspective to do your reporting. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Georgina. And I've just put into the chats, let me know if there's any questions that you have for Georgina, and I'll go straight to you. So let me know if you've got any questions. Now's your chance, drum roll.
Please put me on the spot. I love a question.
One of the things that we've found in previous sessions, Georgina, is the practicality of being able to have not just the how this is done, but then being able to hear someone who's actually put it in place. And you did that really well. It was a great compliment to Karen's presentation. Emily is asking, are there any tips for software use and using Excel spreadsheets, is that the best way to go, or is there other ways to use tools for tracking campaign progress?
Okay, so I'll answer that one in 2 parts. And what I should have acknowledged from the outset, my apologies, I was saying campaign, and when I was saying campaign, I meant all communications, not just advertising. So with campaigns that have advertising, we typically have some additional tools on hand to be drawing data down on that from a social media and a digital advertising perspective, as well as from our website analytics and that type of thing. But to be honest, most of the time that then goes into a good old-fashioned Excel spreadsheet, and then it's tracked week on week. So we basically set up knowing what data we will have access to and the period in which we'll be tracking. We set those templates up ahead of time, and then we input week on week and report up, down and across. But we not only look at the numbers, so to speak, but any interesting anecdotes, and then where possible look to shape up, and we just use a little bit of a text like the blue background. It's very technical. The blue background ad seems to be resonating better. Would A/B test that further and push that one up the line. Or the social media post last week, so an organic post, for example, the social media post is drawing a lot of questions from families about cost. We need to put some more content on our website about what this will cost families.
Great. And the ultimate is the take up. So you're rolling out, you're into 21 local government areas now.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What's the take up been like compared to expectations?
So the take up's been really strong. Look, I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but from memory, we've got about 90+% of children are enrolled, engaged and attending. Always challenging to know exactly how many children are eligible on which to base that data, especially given the challenges of 2020 and what that meant for participation. But take up has been really strong, and from a localised perspective in talking with those regions and the kind of the biggest stakeholders in each, including the councils, the communications has really assisted to either lead or complement what's happening at a local level as well. So they tell me anyway.
Jacqueline, I might ask Georgina to stay online and perhaps do an answer for you in that, because we do need to get into the actual workshop